Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Laurence. I'm from the University of Montreal, and I am here with my colleague over there, Kristian Clarke. Kristian is a PhD candidate at Queen's University, and he is also a senior project manager at the Canadian Actors Equity Association, which is the union representing performing artists working in Anglophone productions in Canada. So Kristian and I started getting interested in the very broad theme of precarity in the arts. And as researchers / activists, we started to get more interested in the harassment issue as a very particular precarity vector on the arts labor market. And we were more precisely, we were interested in the regulation challenges associated to harassment in the workplaces, in Ontario in particular. So we wanted to investigate more precisely these challenges from the institutional side, so for employers and also for the union for equity, because these organizations are the ones that are responsible to ensure safe workplaces. So as Equity did a survey of its member in 2015 on harassment in the workplace, this really provided us with a great case study because the survey was followed by 2 institutional experiments that Equity has developed, the Respectful Workspace Policy and the Not in Our Space initiative that Kristian will present to us later on. So for now, let's just say that our research is grounded in a critical stream of literature on precarity, one that rejects the assumption that precarity impedes agency, either of an individual or a collective nature, and I think this has been greatly exemplified by the recent Me Too and Time's Up movement. So obviously, harassment issues are being addressed by occupational health and safety laws, but what Equity noticed in 2015 was that these laws assume stable employment, stable workplaces, and this is not the case in the arts. So what the union wanted to do is really to develop a tailor-made policy for its own members, but this policy would then be added to the already existing policies that companies are obliged to have in place. Okay, so it's 2 different sets of policies in the same theater company. So then our research question, and this is all preliminary, so we're really hoping to get like advice and comments and questions, is how can we link individual precarity to institutional capacities in the arts when studying initiatives that are designed to address harassment in Canada's live performing arts. So the idea is to study 2 very different types of organizations, the theater companies, which are the employer, and then Equity, which is the union. And like I said, we look at 2 precise institutional experiments. So I thought it would be very useful to present some of the results of the 2015 survey that was conducted in 2015. Over 1,000 responded answered this, mostly performance, working in theater with a little over 50% women. So the quantitative part of the survey showed us that harassment takes on multiple faces. We can talk about sexual harassment for sure, but also bullying, discrimination, and it was very interesting to note that other forms of behaviors creating a toxic work environment was made up of 40% of identified behaviors on Equity contract, but we don't know what it is. We don't know what these other forms of behaviors are, and this could be very interesting to know what artists perceive as harassment, because maybe we could link this to the organizational culture in the arts. Sexual harassment approximately takes on 30% of harassment forms, both experienced and witnessed, and without great surprise is more experienced by women than men. Harassment is also very prevalent. Approximately half of the respondents have declared being the target or witness harassment in the workplace. This happened for a third of them within the past 3 years, so it's very recent. It is still happening. Rehearsal is the most frequent moment where harassment takes place. It is largely caused by only 1%, and it is most often a person in a key position, such as a director. And it's worthy to note that these positions, I don't know if Amanda is going to talk about this, I hope so, but these positions of power are usually occupied by men. Regarding equity, over 85% of both victims and witnesses did not seek assistance from the union, and half of the respondents were not even aware of equity's existing support. The qualitative results was also very striking. When asked why witnesses and victims did not seek equity's help, fear of negative personal fallout, preferred to sort it themselves, were the most common answers. When asked what is the biggest challenge an individual member faces in responding effectively to behaviors that create a toxic work environment while working under an equity contract, fear of losing job, present or future for 37% of the respondents, fear of personal repercussion, knowing where to draw the line on behavior. So this provides us a great idea that it is linked to the type of work. There are small teams. It is a reputational labor market. Artists are scared to speak out. So this is when Equity decided to try to answer to the results by designing two different interventions, the Respectful Workspace Policy and the Not in Our Space initiative that Kristian is going to talk to us about.
Thank you. Maybe you can go through the slides as I move forward. But
I will do it for you.
I feel like I have a booming enough voice. These microphones are fantastic. So thank you, Laurence. Thank you for having me here. Yeah, on the operational side, on the rubber hits the road side of things, the policy that I have copies of here and you're willing to grab as you leave is really the foundation for a cultural shift that Equity has embarked upon. The policy is very much operational. It sort of talks about what constitutes harassment. It talks about the different forms of harassment that exist, from personal harassment like bullying to sexual harassment. It also talks about what harassment is not, which is always important. Things like criticism in the workplace, constructive criticism certainly aren't harassment. It's how that criticism sometimes is delivered, which is problematic. We're actually in the midst of updating this policy. What we're finding is the biggest challenge, and I think Laurence briefly alluded to it in going over the survey results, is that although we define reprisal, we have a hard time as an organization coming up with a strategy in order to deal with reprisal. And one of the things that we are looking at as we revisit the policy is creating a task force to come up with a strategy so that the policy in its next incarnation more directly addresses that challenge. So we'll be likely looking at other institutions, other industries, like the educational institutions out there where you have sessional instructors working in a similar sort of precarious environment, and seeing what sort of information we can glean from that. So out of the policy came a whole campaign, which is called Not in Our Space. And really that campaign had some key elements. It was about stopping harassment before it starts, defining what harassment is and is not, as I've talked about, emphasizing collective responsibility. So when you're in the rehearsal space, as an example, and you see harassment happening, even though it may not be you, it ultimately affects the work environment, and you should be speaking up on your colleagues' behalf. And then also empowering action through multiple reporting options. And I've given that a fancy term, the equity support spectrum. No individual is going to have the same path to resolving their problem as another individual, generally. And so we have many different elements that we have, like tools that we have created that support people in coming to that sort of solution to help them out. Okay, so we don't have much time left, but what I can say is we have those tools that I mentioned. We have a joint statement, which is one of the tools I just read at the beginning of rehearsals. It is a collaborative effort between the theater and Equity to talk about how they collectively support ending harassment in the workplace. We also have respectful workspace advisors. This is something that I helped to develop at Equity, and these are people that you can call up when there is a problem, and you can talk about the issues that you've been facing, and that person works with you, potentially talking to the theater, potentially getting you advice about counseling, as an example. There are many different ways that those calls are dealt with, and those respectful workspace advisors, or RWAs, are trained with a professional counselor who's also a human rights advisor, and those RWAs receive training on an annual basis to refresh their skills. So we have 6 of those at Equity who help out. I think the strength of the campaign, using the policy as the foundation, is that it is a partnership between the producers and Equity, which represents the members. So I'll give it back to Laurence to finish up in terms of analytical remarks and further research. Yeah.
All right. So basically, when we were looking at that, of course, we came up with a little set of questions, or maybe areas that we want to explore some more. The question of the organizational culture in the arts, and especially in the live performance art, is very important. Like Philippe talked about very briefly, the organizational culture might legitimize certain toxic behaviors between performers, and artistic directors or choreographers. Then I have this example for the New York City Ballet, where 2 male dancers have been accused of sexual harassment and have been fired from the company because they were exchanging photos of a female colleague because male and this female in question were in a relationship. And so they've been fired. And one of the questions we have was that are professional associations and production companies equipped to deal with harassment issues in project-based work? It's not only a question of capacities, it is also a question of how the professional association represent the problem. In this case of the New York City Ballet, the union came to the defense of the 2 persons that were accused, because they said that the behavior was not related to the work. The fact that they were exchanging pictures was not relating to the work because it didn't happen during rehearsal, but it was still involving people that work together. So this has created quite a shock in the community. And it could also explain why some performers are not really keen to go speak up to their union whenever there's a problem. So the existence of policies does not mean that organizations have the capacities to implement them, and this is something that we want to explore in the future. We saw that there is an interaction of different regulations, right? Occupational health and safety laws, the company's policies, the union's policy, the codes of conduct that we've seen emerge last year in Canada. So how does this interaction create challenges? It surely does. Are these coordinated? Do they use the same language? These are all very important questions. And finally, the respectful workspace policy targets all type of harassment, but some harassment has a very gender dimension, sexual harassment in particular. So is this strategy very efficient, or should we have another policy just for sexual harassment? As Amanda is probably going to talk about, the problematic of equality, gender equality in the arts really relies on structural dynamics that create a gender power imbalance. And so what's next for us? What we want to do in the next weeks is really to start getting into a dialogue and get some interviews with theater companies participating to the Not in Our Space initiative, and with equity representative, the RWAs. Thank you.